Hello all, and thanks for joining today. It's quite a lot to live up to from Paul's description, but as he states, I am now head of machining in the UK, operating a close team of technical advisors in relation to machinery safety. I did come from an hands-on engineering background, and this is, as a typical Yorkshireman, it all started down a coal mine. And it was a multiple engineering discipline role, but I sort of gained an interest in the health and safety side of things, and therefore as I moved through my career, I embarked on the NEBOSH certification route to gain formal qualifications, which then led on to me completing my diploma. I moved into machinery safety as a profession full-time back in 2010. And that was for, as we were known, Laidler Associates. So I've got quite a bit of background in hands-on assessments and pragmatic approaches to machinery safety, which has sort of led me to where I am today. And we're going to move straight into the UKCA marking concerning machinery, as we are 6 months to go. We're halfway through the transition period, allowed for, still allowing CE mark products onto the UK market. And the CE marking will be replaced by the UKCA mark at the end of the year. So when we look at UKCA marking, it's a new product marking for certain goods, which also includes machinery. And these are items and products that are placed on the market in Great Britain, and this is as defined in our regulations. There are about 25 different product groups, but what we're going to be looking at is machinery, because that falls into one of these. So for Great Britain, it replaces the CE marking, and obviously it's not as straightforward as that for the UK, as everyone might have heard about the Northern Ireland Protocol. So there are slightly different requirements for that. And ultimately, it's happening because of a little thing called Brexit, and we have already departed after over 40 years of being involved with the European Union in relation to market access. And it did actually already start at the beginning of the year. So we're, like I've already mentioned, we're already halfway through the first transitional period, where we're still allowing CE mark products onto the market. So how will this come about? And it's due to Brexit that it's required significant changes to UK law. And we have seen acts being created which allow these changes due to Brexit to be implemented by statutory instruments. And the detailed changes, these have all been implemented by EU exit statutory instruments. And there's over 600 of them, including the longest statutory instrument ever. There's several statutory instruments relating to CE marking transitioning to UKCA, and it's what we would call the mega SI. And the Northern Ireland statutory instruments have significant differences to those of Great Britain, and again, this is down to the EU exit Northern Ireland Protocol. So the statutory instruments have amended original CE marking regulations rather than replacing them. Now, when we say CE marking regulations, it's mainly because the directives are transposed into national law, and these then become regulations through implementation of statutory instruments. And due to evolution of the Brexit arrangements, we've got multiple statutory instruments which correct, amend, and amend amendments. So there's no finalised regulations currently in place that set out clearly and precisely what we need to do to comply from a legal perspective. We have to gain and glean this information from a wide variety of these statutory instruments and transpose them into the wording for existing legislation. So the main statutory instrument, as I've already referred to, is the Mega SI, and it's a UK statutory instrument 2019, and it's number 696. And this includes the UKCA marking requirement. An example of one of these statutory instruments is Statutory Instrument 2008 and it's number 1597. And we would commonly know that as the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations 2008. Now this statutory instrument is what is transposed into national law to relay the requirements of the Machinery Directive. So all member states had to transpose into national law the directives, therefore they would become legally binding and enforceable in all the different member states. So when we look at the EU exit statutory instruments for machinery, we can see the one that we've just been discussing, which is the Supply of Machinery Safety Regulations, and this is a UK transposition of the Machinery Directive 2006/42 EC. We then look at the amended schedule by Schedule 12 for machinery of the Mega SI, and underneath that we have all these multiple statutory instruments generated in the UK that cover the original no deal Brexit updates with other amendments, the meaning of the market of Great Britain and other amendments. So the market of Great Britain would include Scotland and Wales. The IP completion date, and IP is the interim period where the transition from CE to UKCA marked machines have an overlap. Then we have the statutory instrument number 0012, which are the updates for the Northern Ireland Protocol. And then we have the further updates which are coming for further Northern Ireland protocols and recorrections. So as you can see, I think it's clear that we don't have anything as yet which is totally finalized. So what we have to do is we have to interpret the information that is currently available to be able to offer the best advice possible for anyone who is impacted by, machinery, imports, exports, and amendments and use of that equipment. So in relation to timescales and where we are, we're looking at the UKCA mark for application to relevant products, and it's being implemented and is being enforced from the 1st of January 2021. And in some cases, the UKCA mark will automatically apply from this date. However, in most cases, a transitional period has been established, and during this period, the CE mark will continue to be accepted in Great Britain until the 1st of January 2022 to allow relevant economic operators adequate opportunity to comply with the new requirements for UKCA marking. So currently we're around halfway through this journey, this timeline. And there is an exception that if you have already placed your product on the GB market with the CE mark before the 1st of January 2021, your product will be regarded as existing stock and there's nothing new required to do. However, from the 1st of January 2022, when the CE mark transition period ends, the UKCA mark will be mandatory for all applicable products distributed in the GB market. So what we're looking at is reference to GB rather than UK market. And we'll touch on that a little bit later in this webinar. And then for integrators or creators of assemblies in Great Britain, the correct application should be UKCA marking, unless you can fulfill the requirements for CE marking by having an entity to hold the tech file in the European Economic Area. Furthermore, as the assembly is not actually being used on the European market, but on the GB market, this would make sense to follow the UKCA marking requirements. And as we can see, we're already halfway through this timeline, and from the 1st of January, we're looking at UKCA requirements to apply in full for GB relevant product categories. and we will no longer be able to allow or accept imported CE mark products for use on the GB market as far as machinery is concerned. There are some deviations to this, and I don't know if you can see it clear enough, but there is exceptions being made for marine equipment and medical devices which have longer periods. So when we look at the scope of the machinery regulations, there's going to be something that sounds extremely familiar to anyone who's come across the Machinery Directive. And this is because it's very, very similar, almost verbatim with Article 2. And the following descriptions of products are specified within the scope. And it's assemblies which fall into one of the following descriptions, which is an assembly fitted with or intended to be fitted with a drive system other than directly applied human or animal effort, consisting of linked parts or components, at least one of which moves and which are joined together for a specific application. So an assembly as referred to in the previous descriptor, missing only the components to connect it on site or to sources of energy and motion, and also an assembly as previously referred to, ready to be installed and able to function as it stands only if mounted on a means of transport or installed in a building or structure. And it's assemblies of machinery which are partly completed and which, in order to achieve the same end, are arranged and controlled so they function as an integral whole. It can also be an assembly of linked parts and components which are joined together intended for lifting loads, whose only power source is directly applied human effort, and devices which, after putting into service of machinery or of a tractor, are assembled with that machinery or tractor by operators themselves in order to change its function or attribute a new function insofar as they are not tools, and this is classed as interchangeable equipment. It also covers components which can serve to fulfill a safety function, which are independently placed on the market, and which the failure or malfunction can endanger the safety of persons, and it is not necessary in order for the machine to function, or for which components which do not fall within sub-paragraphs may be substituted in order for the machinery to function. And there's an example listed in Annex 5, which is Part 5 of Schedule 2, that details safety components. It can also cover components or equipment, including slings and their components, which are not attached to lifting machinery. They allow a load to be held. They are placed between the machinery and the load, or on the load itself, or are intended to constitute an integral part of the load, and are independently placed on the market. And this is commonly referred to as lifting accessories. It also covers chains, ropes, webbing, and webbing designed and constructed for lifting purposes as part of lifting machinery or lifting accessories, and that's covering chains, ropes, and webbing. It can also be removable components for transmitting power between self-propelled machinery or a tractor and another machine by joining them at the first fixed bearing, and this is a removable mechanical transmission device. And when such components are placed on the market with a guard, the components and the guard together shall be regarded as one product. So when we look at this in simplistic terms, these categories fall under both CE and UKCA because of the direct correlation between supply and machinery safety regulations and Machinery Directive. So apologies if you knew all the definitions already in Article 2, but it's just to demonstrate that there is a definite crossover. So when we're looking at machinery, you're looking at a compressor. It's a powered device. We're not really looking at the receiver. That would fall under something else. And without wanting to muddy the waters, we won't go into that part. We're also looking at robots that have a defined purpose. Obviously, it could be partly completed if it doesn't define what its end function is, but if it has got a defined purpose, then it can be supplied with UKCA marking or CE. we're looking at assembly lines. So where you've got two or more joined machines or partly completed machines, and they are arranged together to achieve a common goal, i.e. the production of something. They are interlinked so that one part directly affects the next. So they have to carry out a procedure on that product to change it or alter it to some extent before it can be processed by the next machine in that line. And they have an overarching control system, so that can be started and stopped and controlled from a single point. This is just a broad sort of definition of assemblies of machinery. There are other factors that could be considered for it to be classed as an assembly of machinery. A garden trimmer or brush cutter. This is divine purpose, it's powered, and it's used for removal of brush and other sort of weeds, so that would fall within machinery. And as mentioned, it is considered in the lifting aspect of the mobile crane. The actual chassis and the drive system, the combustion engine, will be covered under a different directive, but actually where the crane unit is mounted on that chassis, that would fall within the realms of machinery directive. And finally, the slings that are known as lifting accessories that attach a load to a lifting point. We also mentioned safety components, and safety components within the scope of the regulations. It's listed in Part 4, Annex 4, and we've got Part 5, Annex 5 as examples from the indicative list. So we've got extraction systems, guards and protective devices designed to detect the presence of a person, so such as your laser scanners, designed to detect any movement in that area or within that window of operation. Safety belts and seat harnesses, hydraulic non-return valves, where they're used to prevent fall. So again, another safety sort of measure. Emergency stop devices, descriptors of which can be found in 13850. Monitoring devices for loading and movement control in lifting machinery. Logic units to ensure safety functions such as safety relays or safety PLCs. Solenoid valves controlling dangerous movements of machinery. So again, we're looking at indicative examples there of safety devices. And what we've already highlighted is that these are also listed in Part 4, Annex 4. So who are the duty holders? So when we're looking at duty holders, they could be defined as one of three. A responsible person, and that could be a manufacturer or an authorized representative. It could be an importer, and it could also cover a distributor. And when we are looking at definitions of a responsible person, it means in relation to machinery or partly completed machinery, the manufacturer of that machinery or partly completed machinery or the manufacturer's authorized representative. And the manufacturer is anyone who manufactures a product or has a product designed or manufactured and markets that product under its name or trademark. The importer is a person who is the first to place goods from an external market onto the market they are established and operate in. And the distributor is a person other than the manufacturer, importer, or the end user who makes goods available on the market. And placing on the market is defined as first making available on the market by the manufacturer or the importer. The concept of placing on the market refers to each individual good, not to a type of good, and does not necessarily involve the physical transfer of the good. For example, a product which may be stockpiled. And these would all be concerning UKCA and CE marking. So obviously the same requirements would be in place for both, which reiterates the fact that what you have already established for CE marking, there's a lot that is a crossover and can be transposed over to UKCA marking. So what are the requirements for the manufacturers? Well, they have to ensure that the requirements for the design, marking and instructions are in compliance with the essential health and safety requirements. They have to create conformity attestations, and this is a requirement for all machinery. And this would follow the mark, the UKCA mark, the Declaration of Conformity, or maybe even incorporation, but then you wouldn't apply the mark. And then also the creation of a technical file as proof of the compliance of the machine. And we're also looking at conformity assessment procedures, and either assessment of conformity with internal checks on the manufacturer, or type examination procedure plus the internal checks on manufacturer, or full quality assurance. There is no change to following the essential health and safety requirements, because essentially they are the same. There is just simple text changes referring to the relevant markets and GB and UKCA that once referred to EEA and CE marking. However, there will be changes for the conformity requirements, as the mark will change from CE to UKCA. The declaration will refer to the statutory instrument for the supplier machinery regulations, and the technical file will need to be held in the Great Britain market or the UK market, as you are allowed to also hold this in Northern Ireland. The conformity assessment procedures, there's changes required on these, because these used to be carried out by something called a notified body, and these will now be carried out by an approved body for the GB market. And if you were a notified body operating out of the UK, you would automatically move over to being classed as an approved body, and that took effect from the 1st of January 2021. So when we look a little bit closely at the conformity assessment through third-party organisations, so the EU notified bodies based in the UK automatically became the UK approved bodies from the start of the year, 1st of January 2021. And since the 1st of January 2021, the following is applicable. So UK conformity assessment bodies can no longer issue the CE mark certification for the UK market. They can only issue certification for the UKCA marking, as well as a joint UK NI and CE mark for Northern Ireland if required. And this means that actually the conformity assessment is the same. It's just that you are accredited by the local regional accreditation body. So in the UK, it's UKCA that would accredit our certification body, and then there's a whole plethora of EU accreditation bodies, DAX and DANAC and the like, that can certify or provide that certification for notified bodies. But because we can no longer, as an approved body, issue CE marking for certification for the EU market, the EU conformity assessment bodies cannot issue UKCA marking for the Great Britain market. They can issue it for Northern Ireland, and again, if we just touch on that, if a UK approved body were to carry out a third-party conformity assessment for an item being placed on the Northern Ireland market, you would have to have the labelling of the UKNI and CE mark, as Northern Ireland is still following CE marking protocols. The UKNI denotes that it was carried out by a UK approved body rather than an EU notified body. However, because Northern Ireland is still following CE marking, you can simply have a notified body to conduct that third party conformity assessment, and it would still be valid for the Northern Ireland market. But for self-declarations, manufacturers can still self-declare when placing products on the GB market, and this is based on the UKCA marking. So We're looking at conformity assessment through third-party organisations when it's looking at Annex 4 equipment, and even to that extent, if there is a C-type standard covering all of the requirements as listed in Annex ZA, then there is the potential still to self-declare. But where you need that conformity assessment, you do need an approved body for GB, and you could select between a notified body or an approved body for Northern Ireland market. So what are the changes to the mark, the declaration, and the technical file? So a simple and easy table to follow is when we're looking at the mark, it would be the CE mark supplied to Europe. It would be UKCA mark to GB, and it would be a CE or UKNI supplied to Northern Ireland. And that would be for Annex 4 equipment. If it was self-declared, it would simply be CE. The declarations. So for EU, it is a EU Declaration of Conformity or Incorporation. If it's for the UK, it would be a Declaration of Conformity or Incorporation referring to the UK legislation, of which it would be the supply of the machinery safety regulations. And Northern Ireland, again, it would be an EU Declaration of Conformity or Incorporation. The technical file. So the technical file must be available via someone in the EU for CE marking. It must be available via someone in the UK for UKCA marking, and it must be in English. And for Northern Ireland, it must be available via someone in the EU, or it could be held locally in Northern Ireland, as they are still following the same protocol for CE marking. And what about the declarations of conformity? So products being placed on the UK market with UKCA marking, they're going to be supported by a UK Declaration of Conformity. And these declarations of conformity will follow the same requirements as EU declarations of conformity, except for the fact that UK DOCs will refer to UK statutory instruments as these contain the essential requirements. Noting these may have different references in the UK statutory instrument. So basically, the template for declarations will not change. It is the simple references to the statutory instrument or to the directive that it is claiming compliance to. UK DOCs will need to reference UK designated standards. And UK DOCs will, if applicable, require reference to a UK approved body rather than an EU notified body. Again, if this falls within Annex 4. So what we're going to move on to is different scenarios from GB manufacturers supplying to EU. Whilst I appreciate this is concerning UKCA marking, we do want to input a little bit when we're looking at the Great Britain manufacturers supplying external to the GB market. And basically what we're saying is you do exactly the same as required before Brexit. There's no changes to the design. There is the issuance of an EU declaration, and this refers to the directives and the harmonised standards, and you apply CE marking. Hold tech file in Great Britain, but the manufacturer will no longer be in the EU. Therefore, we would need to either appoint an authorised representative for the CE mark to make it valid, which is not a common duty that we do actually mandate, or an EU importer as opposed to a distributor would have to take on some responsibility for accepting that CE mark equipment. There will need to be an EU entity identified on the declaration as the point of contact for the technical file, And that's always been the case when you are outside of the EU and wanting to access the market. And obviously, if it is Annex 4 equipment requiring a third party involvement, then you would need to use an EU notified body, of which obviously there are none in the UK because we cannot accredit to the EU notified body system. We are all approved bodies in the UK, but there are some notified bodies that do have a presence here to be able to offer that service. And this is exactly the same as a non-EU manufacturer that previously asked to follow these requirements. So what we're looking at is we're doing everything the same as we did before, no changes, apart from the finer details that we're actually external to the EU. So we can still self-declare, but we need to appoint someone within the EU to authorize to compile the tech file if a request is made. And it's worth noting that there is an EU regulation coming to force on the 16th of July, just over 2 weeks. And this new EU regulation, which is 2019/1020, will have further implications for anyone importing to the EU from outside of the EEA. And what you will see is, although there's not a common requirement for an EU authorised rep at present, this regulation will certainly change the landscape in that respect, and you will be looking at delegating the responsibilities to an EU authorised representative who will have much more responsibilities than they previously had to fulfil just as simply holding a technical file and being appointed as a responsible person. So what about GB manufacturers supplying to GB? Well, this should be simple and straightforward. We're just hoping that that's going to be the case when the supply of machinery regulations is finalised and published. So there is no changes to the machinery design. You apply the UKCA mark, you issue the Declaration of Conformity, which makes reference to the UK legislation. Again, that's the statutory instrument, Supplier and Machinery Safety Regulations, and that's number 1597. You keep the technical file in Great Britain, and you use the same standards as before, but they will be known as designated standards rather than harmonised standards. And you would use UK approved body if needed. So again, this is a lot simpler because it's our own market. You're producing your equipment in this market, so everything is contained within the same market. A lot more simpler, a lot more straightforward. And the reference to designated standards at this current time, they mirror the harmonised standards, up to the point where it's even using the EN prefix in the designated standards list. So when we look at EU and rest of world manufacturers supplying to GB, again, no changes to machinery design because we're saying that it's already compliant with previous CE marking, etc. They would apply a UKCA mark. They would issue a UK Declaration of Conformity, which would refer to the UK legislation and statutory instrument, and they would refer to a UK entity as a contact point for the technical file. So there's someone appointed within the Great Britain market as responsible for compiling the tech file. The tech file does not need to be on UK soil, and it does not need to be in a physical form, so it can be simply electronic. And the technical file needs to be compiled within a reasonable time frame. And reasonable, we get lots of questions in relation to what's a reasonable time frame. It does depend on the complexity. So a simple one, it can be 1 to 2 days. For a more complex machine, it might be 1 to 2 weeks, but reasonable would not extend to 1 to 2 months. We use the same standards as before, and again, they're just referred to as designated standards. And if it is Annex 4 equipment, you would use UK approved body if required. So the manufacturer. The current requirements for machinery were derived from the EU Machinery Directive. This allowed self-declaration of equipment falling outside of Annex 4 and obviously some within if there was a C-type covering it to the full extent. The requirement was to appoint a person authorised to compile the tech file in the UK. And the manufacturer needs to ensure that all compliance actions are fulfilled to ensure the UKCA marking is valid, or you could delegate that responsibility to an authorised representative. And this, we always have to put a caveat in because this may change once an updated supplier machinery safety regulations is created to cover all the finer details. As currently the guidance, it is quite broad because we have all these other statutory instruments that are amending parts and text within all the existing statutory instruments. And we're seeing this in place already for the EU with the implementation of the new EU regulation 2019/1020 and the appointment of authorised representation. Then we're looking at distributors and importers. So previous UK distributors of EU C-marked machinery into the UK may now become importers of UKCA marked machinery if they act as an intermediary for machinery being placed on the GB market from suppliers based in the European Economic Area. So basically, if you were a daughter company of one that was established in Germany, and you did it as a distributor because it was all within the EU single market. When the UK was subject to those EU rules, then after January 2021, the same GB business now fulfills the role of an importer with the corresponding duties. So basically, we have gone from the EU market, one single market, to two separate ones, and therefore you would act as no longer as a distributor, but an actual importer. And this is because you are trying to place a product on a different market. The definition of placing on the market is making a product available on the market for the first time for distribution, consumption, or use in the course of a commercial activity, whether in return for payment or free of charge. So basically, you still can't give equipment away that's CE marked and expecting that to be accepted after the 1st of January 2022. And the responsible person must meet the obligations of UK legislation as it applied to the GB market. And distributors, they must ensure that the machinery has the appropriate instructions, marking and declaration. And importers have the additional obligation of ensuring that the appropriate conformity assessment procedures have been followed. So when we look a little bit deeper into the importer's duties, the goods must be labelled with the importer's details and either the manufacturer's details or authorised rep's details. And it must ensure that the correct conformity assessment procedures have been carried out and it carries the correct markings. The supplied technical documentation from the manufacturer should be checked for correctness. It should ensure that the goods comply with the relevant EHSRs. The importer would also need to hold a copy of the Declaration of Conformity for a period of 10 years after the imported goods have been placed on the market. But there's an important point to note, which is that end users are not importers if the machine is already UKCA compliant and placed on the market. So if you as an end user wish to purchase a UKCA compliant machine from somewhere within Europe and they have claimed that it does conform and they have placed it available on the market, so it's for sale in Great Britain, and they fulfill the requirements of that, when you actually purchase that and import that, you would not have to follow the importer's duties because you are not an importer, you are a user of that equipment. Users would have to follow pure. Designated standards. So as we've mentioned previously, we do have a change in the name of the standards that are applied, and current harmonized and designated standards lists are mirrored, and designated standards are still referred to with an EM prefix. The withdrawal and implementation dates may differ slightly, so it's something to be aware of, but there are nearly always overlaps between when something is implemented and something is withdrawn. The process of updating and creating these standards is not expected to change, and the BSI are still going to participate in the production of these EN standards for designated standards and harmonization. The inclusion of standards into the list of designated standards, which provide a presumption of conformity to the HSRs in the GB market, that is made by the Secretary of State. And again, just to reiterate this, the list of designated standards for the machinery regulations is the same as the EU list of harmonized standards. So again, it's not even referencing a BS prefix. It's still a direct copy, and it's listed as the EN, the European Norm Standards. So with that respect, if you're following standards as a presumption of conformity for UKCA marking, very, very little is going to change with your process. It is all about the marking and the supply paperwork. But just as an important caveat to that, if you are claiming conformity with the UKCA, whilst it used to be allowable to be in one of the languages of the member states, for UKCA, it needs to be in English. There is, of course, a sunset provision. So when we're looking at sunset provisions, that's looking at, rather than just immediately implementing UKCA marking for the Great Britain market, there's a transition period to allow manufacturers to implement the requirements. And there's an extended period of 24 months for importers to ensure they can implement the requirements needed of their roles. So if you cast your mind back just to what we were looking at with an importer and the responsibilities to ensure that the HSRs have been applied, correct documentation's in place, you know, there's going to be some sort of audit required by the importer to ensure that actually the equipment is correct and is compliant with UKCA marking. So CE mark machinery, as we've said previously, can still be supplied in the UK until the end of 31st of December 2021. And UKCA marking can then be affixed by an adhesive sticker rather than permanently marked until the 31st of December 2022. So you don't have to actually have it indelibly marked. It can be affixed by use of an adhesive label, and that would satisfy the requirements for another 12 months after this first implementation period. So machinery supplied from 1st of January 2022. We've seen some projects delayed due to COVID restrictions that has impacted on completion dates. And this may mean that assemblies are consisting of CE marked equipment but are not completed until after the end of 2021. This would require UKCA application to the assembly, and as current compliance requirements are aligned, it would still be quite straightforward to implement. It becomes a little bit more complicated when we're looking at notified body and approved body involvement, which is why I think further clarity is needed, or even leniency granted due to the current pandemic that we see is affecting businesses, not just on a local or European scale, but on a global scale as well. But from the 1st of January 2022, you must comply with UKCA compliance requirements if it's not placed on the market before the 31st of December 2021, and that would be CE marked as a final product. So if you've still got some component missing to finalize it, then unfortunately, if it goes over that time, you'll be looking at application of UKCA. Justification could easily be created for the use of all these CE components to create a UKCA compliant assembly because of the standards being used and the alignment to date. But it may have impact on a project that's experienced these delays in delivering a finished CE marked assembly. But like I say, they're all aligned, so the application of UKCA marking shouldn't be too onerous to complete, as we're all following the same path. And hopefully, an updated supply of machinery safety regulations will be released to clarify some of the more important points specific to machinery rather than generic product guidance. And I think that's what everyone is hoping for, that one document contains everything that they need to follow to achieve compliance. So that brings to an end my talking, and it gives you the opportunity now to actually ask some questions, and I believe Paul will be reading some of these questions out. We're going to do our best to answer as many as we can, but I'm just conscious of the time, and if we do run out of time, we will try our best to follow up on any unanswered questions, to hopefully put your mind at ease. And again, hopefully what's been presented through this is that it is finer details that are needed to change, but it's not massive changes that are needed. It is the same process that we've followed, that we've applied through CE marking. It's just getting that final acceptance where we are dotting the I's and crossing the T's, so we don't have any instances when you are looking at either importing machines as an importer. I think that's probably the biggest impact that we're going to see, the importer's duties, rather than a distributor. And I think, by setting a system in place of UKCA auditing, I think even that to a certain extent would be not so much of a pain point as what it might appear at this present moment in time. So I'd like to sort of hand back to Paul to read out any questions that you may currently have.
Well, thank you very much, Lee. I think the presentation, spoke for itself. Really well presented, and a great job there. I'm just flashing through a couple of questions. There's quite a few come through, so if you can just bear with us, we'll try and answer as much as possible. One question, Lee, that's come through is, can we stockpile existing stock and continue to use it after the mandatory application date?
So in relation to stockpiling, obviously we saw plenty of that last year, with toilet rolls and the like, but no, it's a little bit different when we're looking at UKCA marking. So stockpiling would actually lend itself more towards the importer role. So again, if you are distributing that or selling that after the 1st of January or after the 31st of December 2021, it should be UKCA marked, which again might only be through application of a adhesive label for now. So you have got a further 12-month grace period.
Excellent. Another question coming through: who is responsible for holding the technical file?
So if we are looking at again accessing the GB market, and we're looking at responsibility for tech file in the event that the HSE needs to check the compliance of a machine because something's been brought to their attention, then the tech file needs to be based in the UK by a UK entity. And surprisingly, we're moving away from GB and we are looking at UK because it can be held in Northern Ireland, which is still part of the UK. And that is the requirement, just as what it used to be for Europe, that it had to be on European soil if you were importing from outside of Europe.
Excellent, thank you, Lee. Another one here on the legal consequences, actually. What are the legal consequences for not conforming to the UK supply of machinery safety regulations?
Well, to be honest with you, it's same as before. So when we're looking at any sort of non-compliance and any deviation from supplying safe machinery, the HSE can prosecute and the fines could be unlimited. But again, this would be dependent on your company size, your company revenue and things like that. So when we're looking at health and safety law, it's always the same, that although they say it's unlimited fines for not following, you would look at what sort of deviation that occurred and how severe that was. And it could be a case that you just get served with a notice rather than an immediate fine. And I think, there's got to be some leniency through this period as well, that there is the chance that not everything gets done right the first time. So I would hope that the HSE take that approach. But I don't think there's going to be any leeway if it's dangerous machinery that's being supplied. And like I say, it could be unlimited depending on the size of the company and your turnover, etc.
Excellent. And I'm very aware of time. I'll just see if we can squeeze a couple more in. There's an interesting one here. To self-certify for UKCA, does the technical file have to be in English? And if this is the case, where does it reference this? And just to add to that, can the technical file also be held in the cloud?
Well, yeah, I mean, the second one is probably easier to answer first, which is, yeah, it doesn't need to be in physical form. You appoint a person responsible for compiling the tech file. So as long as they have access into the cloud to gain that information, then yeah, that's totally acceptable. In relation to does it need to be in English, then the short answer is yes. And this is due to the fact that it would be the HSE that would need to check compliance on this. Therefore, it needs to be in a language that they can read. And because we're based in the GB, it's going to be the English language. It wouldn't be fair to accept, you know, the HSE coming in and everything was in German or Italian, where they couldn't understand what the content of the technical file was. And this is one of the points that needs clarifying the supply of machinery safety regulations. So when we're looking at all these statutory instruments that have been you know, introduced to amend certain parts or certain text, if you actually go onto the government website and look in supply of machinery safety regulations, there will be current latest revisions, and then as you find through the content of the tech file and the language of intended use and things like that, there will be some obscure link through to another statutory instrument that would show you which text has been removed and which has been changed over. But ultimately, when we're looking at a tech file, it's proof of compliance. Therefore, that proof should be easily understood by the enforcing authority on which that product is placed. And because we're moving outside of the market of the EU and it is solely for the GB market, that should be understood by the HSE, which is based in the UK and whose primary language is English.
Excellent. I'm just going to squeeze one more in, Lee, not to put you under pressure. Is there a list of designated standards?
There is indeed. So the list of designated standards is on the government website. So our favourite search engine, if you listed UK designated standards, they would take you to the government website, and there are a number of different ways of viewing that list. What I seem to find works well for me is download it as an Excel file. And obviously they're keeping that up to date. So the current one that you download will be valid until they update it, and it's always handy to save. And it will show you the titles of the standards, the implementation date, potential withdrawal date, and everything that you need to understand of how they apply. And it's exactly the same as, you know, the Europa website, where you can download the harmonized standard list, again in PDF or Excel format.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lee. I think you've earned yourself a well-earned cup of tea. So I'll take this opportunity to close out the webinar, and I'll say thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you didn't get too lost through some of the more detailed aspects of the highlighted points that Lee has mentioned through the webinar, and I hope you found this really informative and great help to your business. As mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a copy of the presentation and recording, and we will look at all of the other questions that's come in. There's quite an array of questions, so I think, you know, it'll take us a little bit of time to go through them, collate them, and answer them, and come back to you on all those answers. But we will do that. Our next available webinar is UKEX, Practical Considerations and Implementation. That is on the 9th of September, focusing on the new UKEX certification scheme, which is now to be implemented by approved bodies. What are the implications to manufacturers within and external to the UK? To register, you can visit our website on www.toughsud.com/en-gb /resource-center. Please get in touch and let us know if there's any other webinar subjects that you're really interested in us covering. It's great to hear exactly what you're interested in so that we can look at putting those provisions on for you guys. Feel free to get in touch with me or send any queries to paul.taylor@toughsud.com, or on the slides there will also be contact information on there. On behalf of myself and Lee, I thank you very much for your time. Hope you've enjoyed the webinar, and I hope you can enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope it's sunny and bright out there for you. Speak to you all soon. Thank you very much.